after many years in the unions, we're used to talking loud, even without loudspeakers. But I'm beginning to get adjusted to the technology here, also for those who are with us virtually, who are watching now and listening in. And we're very grateful that you came, and also especially our members from the media, because ReconAfrica and the oil drilling in the Kavango East region now, in fact, through the whole Okavango Delta into Botswana, is an issue that has magnificent importance. It was raised last week with significant media attention, but hardly any critical analysis or comment when ReconAfrica representatives visited State House. And in the midst of COVID pandemic, in the midst of a collapsing economy, in the midst of a Kavango East region, which is amongst the poorest in Namibia, the president of our country declared ReconAfrica a potential lifesaver. Now we must put that in perspective. Namibia has been calling for foreign investment as the saver of the economy for many years. That's nothing new. We've had that since independence. We had the Export Processing Zone Act, etc. Namibia attracted over the years several investments of very dubious characteristics. There was first a car assembly plant with huge state support that then just collapsed and packed up. We then went further and provided foreign investors with not only tax holiday, but with subsidized water and electricity. Ramatex textile factory from Malaysia. What were the results? Till today, Goreangab Dam is polluted through the colorants that emerged from the Ramatex factory. Parts of groundwater in Windhoek were polluted. The UN technicians found that the information was deliberately suppressed. Ramatex workers suffered health risks till today, mostly lung problems. So investments are not naturally or by chance good investments that fit in with a country's development strategy. And when you look at our current programs, be it the employment policy, be it the commitment to renewable energies, it seems that ReconAfrica presence in Namibia is kind of a contradiction to many other intentions. And what was even more surprising in the early days was when communal farmers in Kavango East asked for a meeting with the regional governor, Wakudumo of Kavango East, and said, what is going on here? Why are you giving away our land for oil exploration and drilling? And he told me, well, you're too late, the decision is made. The very people who are affected by it. So that just as an introduction to the issue, we are seeing a repetition of a blind belief in foreign investment, pronounced last week by our president. We are seeing a reluctance to answer questions, legitimate questions that were raised by various individuals and the public. And unless these questions are answered, there is no way one can allay fears or in any way even support what is going on in Kavango East with ReconAfrica right now. So this is the background, and you will find outside on the table copies of the petitions that were handed to government 3 weeks ago. It is also quite surprising that a petition that's signed by over 50 Namibian organizations and over 70 regional and international organizations has received so little attention. So today's press conference, media conference, is meant to provide you with more information, to give you the chance to ask questions, and for then the general public to understand what is at stake when we talk of ReconAfrica's oil exploration and drilling. And we are very privileged to have 3 speakers that shed light on it. And after each presentation, you will be given the chance to ask questions and to gain clarity on any aspect. Our first speaker is Matt Totten Jr. He worked, he has a BSc and master's degrees in geology, specializing in oil and gas. So from a technical side, that is exactly his area of expertise. Not only as a student, he also worked as exploration and operations geologist for British Petroleum, both onshore and offshore. So he has also very practical experience. What does oil drilling and exploration involve? What are risks? What are measures of mitigation that can and must be taken? And when should such activities cease altogether? So we're very glad to have you, Matt. Thank you very much for making your expertise available. That will be the first presentation. We then move to Rinani Musutwa, and I will introduce her, and to April, Nadia April. And these will be the three presentations today. After each one, please feel free to ask your question. It's not a panel discussion. It is for clarity so that we all understand what is at stake here, socially, environmentally, politically, when we deal with Recon Africa in Namibia. Thank you very much for attending. My name is Herbert. I'm just moderating this media conference. Thank you so much. Matt, the floor is yours.
Hello. I hope it's okay if I can take my mask off. I am fully vaccinated. Okay, so thank you for the introduction. My name's Matt Totten Jr. I did work for British Petroleum, both onshore and offshore, exploration and operations for a number of years. And I'm here in Namibia because I'm married a Namibian, and she is actually the one who informed me originally that, hey, there's this oil company coming to frack in Namibia. And as soon as I heard that, I was immediately concerned, because we all know Namibia is an extremely water-scarce country, and fracking requires enormous amounts of both water and number of rigs to produce, drill sites to produce, and so this in the Kavango region, in one of Africa's most pristine wildlife areas, is outrageous, to say the least. So that's how I originally got involved with this, with my expertise in oil and gas geology. So what I want to cover today is really focusing on Recon. I've been following them since late 2020, picking apart their story, really doing what I did for BP in terms of exploration, and also sometimes in exploration, a company wants a joint venture. So you'll do something where you evaluate another company's data to see, does it make sense or not? So that's kind of what I've been doing sort of as a civilian with the Recon Africa story this past year. So the big questions are, is there commercial quantities of oil in the Kavango? I want to address that based on both what Recon Africa has said, what they haven't said, and what the geology that's been done for several decades tells us. There's been a lot of hype around the Recon project, as shown by the extreme elevation of their stock price over the last year, but I would say no real public-facing proof. A big question for Namibia, again, is will they frack? So I want to touch on that a bit. And the sad reality is there is a green development alternative that is already in full force, that Namibia really needs to pay attention more to that than oil and gas development. And then I'll end with why an immediate drilling moratorium is really critical for the Kavango. So just for any international viewers on the live stream, where is Namibia? It's in Southwest Africa. And this slide basically shows the different oil and gas exploration basins that have been explored over the last several decades. A few offshore, and the two onshore are the Namib Basin in the south and the Ovambo Basin that straddles northern and southern Angola. And that's what we'll be focusing on today. And one other thing, I compiled this river catchment map of Namibia. And what you can see is all the different river catchments that basically funnel into the Okavango Delta in Botswana, and also the ephemeral river systems that flow, that are upriver of the Okavango deltas. So when you look at the Kavango area, which is outlined in that red northeast corner, those river systems are upstream of the Okavango Delta. So any pollution that happens there is more than likely going to find its way into the Okavango Delta at some point. If we look at Recon Africa's lease position, they acquired the PEL 73 leasehold in 2015, and more recently the PEL 1 leasehold in Botswana. And the two dots that you see here, those are Recon Africa's first two completed wells. And they are 50 kilometers from the Okavango River and 260 kilometers from the Delta. But what Recon likes to conveniently leave out is that Omotako ephemeral river system does flow right by the two wells they just drilled. And although it's an ephemeral river that doesn't flow at the surface all year round, it only flows during the rainy season, it's flowing underground all year round. So if you're drilling a well and any pollutants make it into that groundwater, they are going into that river system and at some point emptying out into the Okavango River and the Delta. And just to give you a picture of how close, this is a aerial photograph of the first well next to the Omotako River. That's the red highlighted line there. That's less than 1 kilometer away from the rig. So we're not in an effective buffer zone territory here. Any groundwater spillage or seepage is probably going to make it into the Omotako. Now let's touch on the Ovambo Basin. It has already been explored. Exploration started in the Ovambo Basin in the 60s and continued in different phases through the 2010s. And you can see there's been a lot of wells. I wouldn't say a lot of wells. There's been about 5 or 6 wells drilled in the Ovambo Basin north of the Etosha National Park, and lots of different data sets have been collected. And Recon Africa came along in 2013 and bought this aeromagnetic survey. It's not apparent if they also got the gravity survey because they never talk about it. And the gravity survey actually indicates that their geologic model is a bit flawed, which I'll get into in a moment. But they took this one piece of data, this aeromagnetic survey, and they interpreted one of the deepest onshore basins in the world that everybody else missed. And so this is a screenshot of their actual depth to basement map. So this map is showing the reds are shallower basements, so how deep is the granite basement underneath the surface, and the dark blues would be the deeper bits. So think about the blues as your big bowls or holes that sediments can fill up. And the dark blues, you can have a thicker sediment pile, and the thicker your sediment pile, the more likely it is you have a oil and gas basin. Now what's interesting here is this is Recon Africa's own map, their own interpretation, where they say the Kavango area is over 30,000 feet deep. But then on their own map, look at the Ovambo Basin area. It's bluer, it's darker and bluer, indicating that their own interpretation says the Ovambo Basin is the deeper area that's already been explored. And this is important because the way Recon Africa promoted this project to Namibia and investors around the world is they said, nowhere in the world is there a sedimentary basin this deep that doesn't produce commercial hydrocarbons. And then they said, given the nature that this basin, of the basin and its tremendous thickness, this is pretty much a no-brainer. It will be productive, and I'm expecting high quality oil. Very promotional, based on one piece of data and a flawed interpretation at that. Because when we actually look at the Ovambo Basin, where we have seismic data, where we have test wells, there is a different depth to basin map interpretation. So just to give you some reference on this map, if you remember those seismic lines here, that's that Ovambo Basin area there, we get a very different basin depth story. Instead of 12,000 plus meters, we're seeing more from seismic 5 to 6,000 meter depths. And that's important because we just saw from Recon Africa's own map, there's super deep blues over in the Ovambo Basin. That doesn't match with the reality we see in the seismic. And the takeaway here is if it's wrong over in the Ovambo Basin, their depths in the Kavango are pretty much guaranteed to be flawed as well. On top of that, when we come to the promoting this project to Namibians, to the world, to investors, we just see a slew of paid promotional articles, most notably oilprice.com's articles starting in January 2020, just with Recon Africa executives, Jay Park, Dan Jarvie, Scott Evans, and just promoting, is this the most exciting oil play of the decade? Is this the world's most exciting oil discovery? Is this the most exciting oil play of the last 20 years? Recon Africa, the truth about the world's most exciting oil play. Could this be the most promising oil play of the decade? This oilprice.com outlet owns a significant number of Recon Africa shares. They have a financial incentive to promote this play and for the stock price to go up. And this is basically what investors are using to get into this project. So now let's talk about some other very weird things about the way Recon Africa does business and their oil and gas exploration. In 2021, there isn't an oil and gas company, I should say a reputable oil and gas company on planet Earth that would drill, select and drill exploration targets before doing their seismic exploration. Most notably, you would never pick an exploration target on just aeromagnetic survey data alone. I mean, I knew this from my oil and gas days, but I've called all my old oil and gas colleagues and I said, would you pick exploration targets based on aeromagnetic data? And every response I got is absolutely not. It can be interesting, useful data, but not in a silo. It's data that you combine with offset well data, with seismic, with gravity. Then you can have a good idea of where to place your exploration targets. But starting in June 2019, Recon Africa went to the Namibian government and submitted their environmental impact assessment for their exploration wells, and in less than 2 months got their environmental clearance certificate. It's important to note that the Namibian public did not know this project was going on in a greater sense yet at this point. So there wasn't a lot of public commentary or interested stakeholder comments because nobody knew about it. And the other interesting thing to point out here is that in their environmental impact assessment, Recon Africa says that they're targeting equivalent rocks to the hydrocarbon-prone unconventional deposits within the Karoo group of South Africa. So their analog is the tight gas Karoo shales in South Africa. That is how this project started and how it was sold. So when journalists and people in the community say, hey, is Recon Africa planning to frack? Well, all of their public-facing and investor relation data this was an unconventional frack play. They commissioned a report from Sproul International to say, hey, how much unconventional potential do you think the Kavango area has? And Sproul only focused on producing a resource potential number based on unconventionals, and that is what Recon used to sell the project to their investors. On top of that, I just showed you the June 29 exploration well EIA. And as late as July 2020, Recon Africa had a big research report that they promoted that also stated that the initial target is an unconventional play in the lower Permian age Karoo shales with the potential of shallower conventional targets. So now, around November to December 2020, that's when the public became aware that this project was going on. And that's when you started to see public protests. There was an actual protest march in December 4th, 2020. And that's when Recon Africa's public-facing story really started to change. And in fact, there became to be so much public backlash that they had to hold a information session on February 2nd, where they started to say, we are going to do conventional oil. That's a direct quote. As well as we launched a comprehensive regional tectonic and stratigraphic study that was completed in March 2020 and established that conventional oil and gas are the basis of our operational program. So that's a direct quote from that meeting that, hey, we were done with unconventionals by March 2020, but I just showed you there was a research report on their website from as late as, I believe, they took it down in around February, March 2021, but that was published in July 2020. So those dates don't make sense. So what they're telling the public and what they're telling investors has been a real mismatch, which just is a mark of a disreputable operator, in my opinion. On top of that, they started drilling their first exploration well in January 2021. And as you'll notice from this video, they did not line their mud pit with a synthetic barrier. If you're taking shortcuts where everybody can see, just imagine what they're doing down hole where things get really expensive. To give you an idea of what a properly lined mud pit looks like, here's a picture from the United States. You can see the synthetic mud liner. And when, so this was really brought to the public's attention by a Nat Geo article from May 2021, I believe. And when they were confronted, they came up with this bogus story that no, we don't need a pit liner because we lined the pit with an organic polymer, and that'll keep things from seeping into the groundwater. And on top of that, our drilling fluid is 100% organic and biodegradable and non-toxic. So we're going to use it as a fertilizer on the subsistence farms around the rig. To me, as an oil and gas expert, what that says to me is not only didn't I not line my pit, but now I can just dump my toxic wastewater on the local farmland. So I don't even have to pay to get rid of it. This is just an insane double down. And I've never seen a case where this has been proven safe or effective around the world. So again, another mark of concern in their operations. And even if their drilling fluid is water soluble, I mean, it is water soluble. They are drilling with a water-based drilling fluid, but even if it's completely non-toxic and biodegradable, well, you're drilling through very deep old rocks. You may need to add, mix in toxic additives to your mud if you have a loss of circulation event to save the well. You can drill through rocks with heavy metals that get into the mud and come back to the surface. Also radioactive materials, hypersaline brines. And so that's why we line the pits. And why does Namibia get a substandard experimental operational policy where this would never fly in the United States or Canada? So let's fast forward to today, August 2021. What are their operations? They completed their first exploration well in early April, and it was a planned depth of 3,800 meters. Their second well was completed in mid-July, also a planned depth of 3,800 meters, and they just started acquiring their 2D seismic data late July. And we just recently, on August 5th, got the first real data release from Recon Africa. And what they said was, as the local geologists have been predicting, oh, the 6-2 well, the first well, they only drilled to about 2,300 meters. So that's about 1.5 kilometers shallow of what they targeted. And their second well reached almost 2,800 meters, so about 1,000 meters shallow of what they targeted. They encountered no source rocks, which is very important. They released no wireline log excerpts. As far as I know, they didn't even take drill stem tests, which is unheard of in an exploration well. And if they did, they didn't release that data. That's basically after you drill the well, you stick a tool down in the hole where you can open a pressure valve and let fluids come into the drill stem. And then you can see, okay, how much gas and oil is in the formation of interest. It's very interesting that they wouldn't do that on their exploration wells. They released some data trying to say they had gas shows and oil shows, but this was really laughable because their peak gas shows were maxed out at 5 units on a 10,000 unit scale. Okay, that's just 0.05% mud gas concentration. There's more gas in a can of beans than that. And, and it really could be measurement error. That is within the measurement error of the mud log gas chromatograph. They also released no rock ages or formation depths, so there's no way for us to verify, hey, which rocks did you drill through? You know, is it way deeper than what we saw in the Kavango Basin or not? And actually, when I do my own sort of geologic, I mean, it's hard to tell. It's a bit speculative because they didn't release any real data. But what they released seems pretty consistent with what was explored in the Kavango Basin north of Etosha National Park. There's nothing really different about this well from the wells that were drilled over the past few decades about 400 to 500 kilometers to the west. Okay, so this was their sort of projection of what you would find in the Kavango. So here you're saying that was the Kavango Basin, and we're going to see this huge thickening as we get over to the Kavango. And we might even find up to 6,000 feet or 2,000 meters of Permian age source rock. That is just laughable now, because their wells didn't even make it, you know, much past 2,000 meters or and definitely not past 3,000 meters, and they didn't encounter any source rock, self-admitted, in that data release. So we know their geologic model is off now. Okay, and the investor community isn't buying it either. That point there, that inflection point where the stock price really took a dive, that's their data release day. That's August 5th. And their stock price has plummeted since because people who know oil and gas geology know this is not a commercial play anymore. And sadly, I have to say, I think Namibians have seen this movie before. I don't know if anyone here remembers HRT Namibia from 2013. It was an offshore exploration company that promised a massive multi-billion barrel find offshore. And we're really seeing the same sort of thing over again with Recon Africa here in 2021. A multi-billion barrel oil basin was promised. We got a visit to the State House. A vial of oil and a so-called oil show from the exploration well was showed off, actually at the State House with HRT Namibia, and in an oilprice.com article published the same day for Recon Africa. And at both of these visits, the company was very clear in saying the discovery is still non-commercial. So they were making that caveat even though they were coming to State House to basically talk about this big discovery. So in the case of HRT Namibia, I believe the company folded a few months after their third exploration dry hole was drilled. And looking at Recon Africa stock price, it makes me wonder if they're headed in the same way. Okay, so I've kind of laid out a case that the data doesn't add up for a commercial oil and gas discovery in the Kavango. So why worry? What's the big deal now? Well, if Recon continues to drill wells, first of all, they're taking away precious, pristine wildlife areas and subsistence farming areas. So they'll fragment the habitats. I really tried to cover the threat to water and soil pollution. They're not lining their pits, and now they're saying they're taking their drilling fluid and using it as a fertilizer in local farmland. We're seeing Kavango resident displacement already. There's a court case at the Supreme Court right now about that. And just all of the oil and gas infrastructure you build, more roads, storage facilities, all that infrastructure basically allows things like illegal logging and poaching to become easier. So the more this goes on, the more of a threat to the Kavango area wildlife and the local residents we see. And I'll add that I tried to lay out a case where Recon Africa is not a reputable oil and gas company. And if they know there's no oil and gas potential in the Kavango from what they've drilled, and this is purely a stock play for them at this point, there's really no incentive for them to go above and beyond from an environmental perspective. There's really no incentive for them to make sure their wells are drilled to the highest standard because they need to save their capital. And the sad thing is, we really do have a green development alternative in Namibia. In fact, the American ambassador and the Namibian Ministry of Mines and Energy, Minister Tom Alwido, signed a memorandum of intent to build a 5 gigawatt solar power plant in the very near future. So Namibia is already going green. And there is investment money for development coming into Namibia. So why waste your time, risk your people and your wildlife to continue the Recon Africa project? So I'll end by saying we're calling to suspend all oil and gas exploration activities in the Kavango. We want to establish a public commission of inquiry so any oil and gas activities are transparent. We would like a multinational transboundary strategic environmental assessment done before any further oil and gas activities continue, and that's for the entire life cycle of the project, not just for the exploration wells and then the seismic and then the production and so on. And then extensive consultations need to be had with all concerned interested parties in their local languages, if it's in the areas where people don't speak English or common tongues, and basically with the public commission of inquiry, we really need this consultation in good spirit so things are transparent and all parties have a say what happens for the future of the Kavango and Namibia. So I'll end there and I can take any questions. Thank you.
Maybe just to break the water a bit, my name is Frank Steffen. I'm of the Allgemeine Zeitung. Maybe you can just explain a bit better to the lay people around there. What do you understand with aeromagnetic and gravity, whatever?
Oh. So, maybe this is better. Aeromagnetic and gravity data is used initially at the beginning of oil and gas exploration because it's pretty cheap to acquire. You fly an airplane in a grid pattern low above the surface, and you just measure the Earth's magnetic field at each point along the grid and the gravitational measurements as you go along the grid. So it's easier to acquire and process, but it's not what I would call high resolution. It just gives you a picture for, hey, is there a deep pile of sediments hiding under the subsurface here? And then if that makes sense, you can do, you can start to spend a little more money to maybe shoot seismic, do outcrop studies, and really paint the full picture before you decide to buy a rig, ship it to Namibia, cut down forests to build drill pads, and then start drilling a rig, start drilling a well, which is the most high impact part of the project, in my opinion.
Okay, and so where does the gravity data come in?
So the gravity data is an indirect indicator of depth to basement, basically. And so that's an interesting question because ReconAfrica says they basically only use magnetic data to produce their basin model, their depth to basement map. But the gravity data in the Kavango area indicates that the depth to basement would actually be shallower than the Ovambo area. And they never mention this in their investor data. They only mention their high resolution aeromagnetic data and the fancy ways they processed it. And I will also say that magnetic data is really susceptible to error with any volcanics present in the subsurface, shallow volcanics. And the Kavango area is known to have shallow volcanic intrusions, which is another reason why you wouldn't want to trust the magnetic data and drill exploration wells strictly based on that.
Morning, my name is Selima from NBC. I just wanted to, maybe I missed it, the Ovambo Basin, which region is it?
The Ovambo Basin is historically, it's been considered north of the Etosha Pan, so north of Etosha National Park, all the way into the Kavango. And it's only until recently, by ReconAfrica, no one else I know, that they started calling the Kavango Basin separate from the Ovambo Basin, saying they're actually two separate basins. Okay. But for the purpose of this presentation, I was showing them separate to refer to what ReconAfrica is doing, and that in that sense, the Ovambo Basin would be the north central part of Namibia, north of Etosha National Park.
All right. So my other question is, if there's really no well in Kavango, why is ReconAfrica doing all these? Is it just for the sake of publicity, or why are they doing this, in your own opinion?
Well, they're definitely trying to make money. That is the number one reason. And they can still make money even if there's no oil there, as we've seen with the stock price. So the stock price goes up. Things that they can do when the stock price really inflates is they can take loans based on their stock price and go buy assets somewhere else in the world. And then when everybody finds out, oh, it's not really a good project, and the investors start to leave, the company can then point to the other asset they bought and say, actually, we're worth this much. So the stock price shouldn't collapse back to near zero. So that's one thing they could be doing. There are people that are saying the company insiders are finagling ways to sell off their shares at that inflated price, so they can make money that way. But that's a bit hard to understand. You don't know if they have the stocks, some of their stocks in a family member's name or whatnot. So those things are a bit more difficult to piece out. But there's a lot of ways they can make money with an inflated stock price and no oil being there.
Thank you.
Matt, we've got a question from some of the guys who watch this on the internet. And the one question from John Grobler would be, am I correct in thinking that if they had intersected any oil-bearing strata in the Kabwe hole, we would have seen an oil slick on the Kabwe waste pond surface?
Okay, I think the questioner is asking, like, if they, not necessarily, just because they penetrated an oil-bearing zone doesn't mean you'll see an oil slick per se. But what I think you would see, if they penetrated a really strong oil-bearing zone that they could really show off to the international community, you would see a lot bigger data release. You would see a lot more significant and easy to verify data rather than really just interpretive data that they've released. Most of the data they've released is their interpretations of things they've seen, not the actual data like the well logs. And that's pretty typical when a company finds a big discovery and the magnitude that they're claiming. They also release well log excerpts to really prove it. And ReconAfrica hasn't done that.
That brings me to another question of mine, because I, in the Allgemeine Zeitung, wrote a couple of times about the Viceroy report. And one of the critical questions there was the point that they said, if you've got the sole right to explore an area as big as the one in question, then you would normally rather go and brag about your find instead of sort of sticking it away and not giving data out.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. The only reason to be tight and not tell everybody this is what I found is if other oil and gas companies get excited about it and can come in and lease the land around the find. But because ReconAfrica has the entire lease position from the whole, basically the whole Kavango in Namibia into the Solido Hills area of Botswana, there's no reason for them to be tight. In fact, you would want to start really promoting it so you can get joint ventures in. And I actually think the data looks so bad. First of all, I don't think ReconAfrica would let another joint venture actually come see their data room, because it would be pretty sad. And then also, I don't think a big major oil company would see this and be interested in partnering. That's my opinion.
Okay, and then just a second, I think more a statement than a question of John Grobler. He said, this smells like a pump and dump scheme, more aimed at mining the stock exchange than anything else. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I would say maybe, wildcatting, sometimes you can get lucky. But after drilling their first well, I think they probably know the chance of a commercial discovery is pretty low now. So at this point, it really is just extending the project for as long as you can and making people think there's a chance of a discovery to keep the stock price inflated, keep the project going. But I think if there was data to refute a lot of the negativity being directed at ReconAfrica, they would have done it already. Like, they want to stop the stock price bleeding because, let's just go back to that real quick. I mean, this is less than 2 weeks. I mean, it's just been a precipitous fall from the first time they really released any well data. So people aren't impressed, and if they had something to turn the ship around, they would have released it already.
Thank you so much. This was the technical side of things, but I'm glad that Matt also drew in some of the past experiences. This is not the first time. In fact, even before the 2013 case, we had a Brazilian oil investor coming to Namibia, some might remember, where our ministers were dancing samba with the flown in samba dancers from Brazil celebrating the oil finds. And not a drop has emerged ever since. Okay. We're now going to look at other aspects, and the Women's Leadership Center has brought together people with different areas of expertise. We've heard now geologists talking of the technical side. We've also seen the commercial aspect of share prices dropping, and that would explain also the timing of the visit. As the share prices dropped in free flight, all of a sudden these two leading directors of ReconAfrica appear at State House to show we have the full backing of the Namibian government. I'm now very pleased to introduce my comrade and colleague, Rinani Musutwa, from the Economic and Social Justice Trust. She's been looking at this project alongside other work she's been doing, well known for her role as coordinator of the activist school in Namibia, but also the basic income grant. She's also a board member of the Namibian Journal of Social Justice. So this is now a presentation that looks more at the social and political implications of what we have seen emerging around Recon Africa. And I'm glad to the center to bring together these different aspects, because it is not just a technical or economic issues, it's an ecological one, a social one, and a political. So Rinani, over to you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to this very important event. So my presentation is around all the rights that Recon Africa has been abusing. We've already heard from Matt how none of the process, of Recon Africa acquiring a license and getting the EIA, the environmental impact assessment, nothing was known at all. No Namibian, maybe one or two knew, but the majority of the people really didn't know about Recon's planned oil and gas exploration in the Kavango East and West. We only found out about that late 2020. And Recon has been all this time, ever since it came, it's been claiming that it's following government-approved procedures and has obtained all the required permits that are needed for its work. But the company has broken almost every single law possible ever since it landed on our shores. Nobody was in the know of their environmental impact assessment process, which was completed in 2019. That's because Recon didn't really engage, interested parties and affected communities. So no objections or concerns were raised or published in Recon Africa's final environmental impact assessment, and that led to Recon being issued a environmental clearance certificate in 2002. So now we know that that's something that usually happens, that in the environmental impact assessment process of a high impact industrial development, on communal land and conservation land, there is normally voices included from the local and indigenous communities and experts and scientists and all the other organizations that work in their respective region. And there is absolutely no critical list of interested and affected parties included in Recon Africa's environmental impact assessment, and that contravenes the Environmental Management Act of Act 7 of 2007. Recon started its operations without obtaining any land rights, as required by the Communal Land Reform Act of 2002. So when it came, it just started, drilling and started evicting people, indigenous people from their ancestral land. Like, they just come and say, okay, we're going to start drilling, can you move, please? So when they started drilling, actually, they started in the Mahangu field of a local farmer without his permission or compensation, or without making any arrangements of reallocating him to another land. There is currently a lawsuit in the High Court of Namibia against ReconAfrica by a family whose land they have grabbed. Okay, let's say that ReconAfrica maybe didn't know how to acquire land in Namibia when they first came. But then they should have learned by now. And they continue to do exactly the same thing as they've been doing from the beginning. They should know that what they've been doing is not right, it's not legal. So if they were doing things in good faith, they should be by now be doing it in the right way. And we know that this is not going to end. They're going to keep moving to different parts of the Kavango region because they need to keep the process going, as Matt tried to explain to us, to keep the stocks up so they can make money. So they're going to go around that whole area and continue doing exactly the same as they are doing now. We're having issues currently right now as we're speaking that there are people in the informal settlements who are clearing land because they need somewhere to settle. People are homeless, and they've been arrested and their shacks have been demolished. But ReconAfrica is allowed to grab people's land without any consequences. Why are there exceptions being made to ReconAfrica? You know, does it mean that Namibian lives don't matter or what? Namibia is actually the driest country in sub-Saharan Africa. So water is a really valuable, scarce resource for this country that is drought prone. So oil and gas exploration, as Matt explained to us, uses huge amounts of water. And I'm just wondering, where is ReconAfrica going to get all that water from? And up till today, we don't have any confirmation if ReconAfrica has permits to use and dispose of water as required by the Water Resource Management Act of 2004. So whatever they're doing now, they actually don't have the right to use the water, they're doing it illegally. The Kavango region is underdeveloped in terms of infrastructure. Even though they are close to the Kavango River, there is no way they can access that water. So they struggle continuously to have access to clean drinking water. And the majority of the people in those two regions derive their livelihood from crops and livestock farming. So they are completely reliant on groundwater for their livelihoods. So it's really, really important to maintain groundwater levels and quality. It's important for the health and well-being of the residents. The WWF carried out a pre-drilling assessment of groundwater quality in community boreholes surrounding the ReconAfrica drill sites. It was done to establish a baseline that can act as reference for future studies and monitoring. The results from that study concluded that there are no compounds typically associated with contamination from oil and gas exploration present prior to drilling. The WWF report can be used in the future as evidence to hold Recon accountable should any contamination occur. We are more than willing to email that documentation. We can exchange contact details at the end of this press conference. So the risks that are really involved in all this is not worth it. What is it in for us? What's in for us? What's in for the Namibians? It's not really worth it. For that, our groundwater, soil, and air will be contaminated by Recon's activities, and this really poses a huge health risk to residents living near the drill sites. And imagine this is just going to go on and on like that unless we stop them. There's a risk that groundwater becomes salty due to disrupted groundwater pathways and elevated reduced levels. So the short-term health risk associated with exploration and extraction of oil and gas is respiratory problems such as asthma, eye, nose, throat irritation, headaches, nausea, dizziness, trouble sleeping, and fatigue. And the long-term health risks are cancer, liver damage, immunodeficiency, neurological symptoms. So is it really worth it? as we've heard from Matt, Recon has not been following the environmental management plan. It doesn't follow the guidelines on disposing of their harmful waste drilling fluids to prevent land and groundwater contamination. They haven't lined the pits in which they dispose of the waste drilling fluids. The waste drilling fluids, which is sometimes diesel and oil mixed with water, and then there's mud in it, becomes contaminated with chemical compounds from geological formations that come out during drilling, like Matt tried to explain to us, and those are radioactive compounds, some of them, which are toxic to people and wildlife. Now, as Matt said to us, we've heard from the people in the ground that Recon Africa has donated the waste drilling fluids to local farmers. If you Google NORM, that's NORM, that's Canadian regulations on oil and gas exploration. That explains to you that that's not actually supposed to happen. Why are they trying to poison our local farmers? That we really don't understand. We are a dry country. We need all the water, every single drop that we can get. We need to really treat it carefully and preserve it. Now, Recon Africa says that this oil boom, you know, the oil of the century discovery, it will provide jobs and lift people out of poverty. So they've been. It was only after public outcry that Recon decided to go around just a few villages to inform the people what they were planning. It's not supposed to be done that way. They're supposed to, during the environmental impact assessment process, consult the people, not after they have received their environmental clearance certificate. So now they're going there just informing people, not ask for their permission. They're supposed to ask for permission, not just say, yeah, we're going to do this, whether you like it or not. They go around there and tell people that, oh, we're going to employ you. And that's what they've been doing. They hire people for 2 weeks, and then they fire them, and then rehire new people. So they've been doing that the whole time, and we believe that they're trying to do that to push the numbers up of the people they've employed, so it looks like they are providing jobs for the Namibian people, and that's casual employment. They are not allowed to do that. They are violating the labor laws through that casual employment practice, and the Labor Act of 2004 doesn't allow for that. We doubt that Recon employees, obviously, the thing is that the oil and gas exploration and extraction is a specialized industry. I'm convinced that there are not so many people in this country, or the specific people from that region, that should benefit from that venture. I'm convinced there are none who can, do the top level jobs. So they're only giving them these little casual jobs like washing dishes and guarding the gate and chasing people away when they come there. They must have foreign employees at their drill sites. And in February this year, an inspector from the Ministry of Labor tried to go there and do inspections, and they wouldn't allow the person to come in. They completely refused him. They didn't want him to come to inside the drill sites and do his inspections. And we're just wondering why, if everything you are doing is right and correct and doing it according to the law. I mean, what's the need to refuse a labor inspector from coming to do his job and inspect, see if everything is being done according to the law? Namibia is well known around the world for. Namibia is a global leader of conservation and natural-based rural development, and that has earned us the name Conservation Capital of Africa. We were the first African country to incorporate environmental protection into our constitution. And this was reinforced by giving local rural communities rights to manage their wildlife through more than 70 conservancies. So the reason why Namibia is best known for conservation efforts is because 43% of our land surface area is under active conservation management. So those include national parks, conservancies, community forests, etc., etc. Now, allowing ReconAfrica to operate in protected areas, because where ReconAfrica is drilling at the moment, there's community forests there and there's conservancies as well. If we allow ReconAfrica to continue operating in protected areas, that definitely goes against our values. That's what we are well known for. We are a conservation country. That's what we are well for. The conservation is the cornerstone of our values. I don't understand why we are compromising our values without really serious consideration. And I'm pretty sure that if this continues, Namibia is probably going to lose its #1 spot that it has now, that it's Africa's best conservation country. Who are we without our values? What are we then if we compromise our values? Namibia is, as I mentioned before, is the driest country in sub-Saharan Africa. And we have continuous drought in this country. And our climate, due to that, our climate is vulnerable to climate change. And it doesn't make sense to Namibia to contribute to global warming by allowing ReconAfrica to come and explore for oil and gas in this drought-stricken country. This company is a serious threat to us. It has shown blatant disregard for local residents affected by its operation. Community members had absolutely no opportunity to defend or oppose the illegal acquisition of their ancestral land rights. Recon's activities represent blatant violation of international recognized rights to free, informed, prior consent by local communities. Recon poses a really great threat to our water resources, agricultural land, livelihoods and wildlife in that area they are exploring in. If they are allowed to continue, that will severely disrupt the way of life of indigenous people through the dispossession of their ancestral land and the poisoning of their water and land that they depend on for survival. In terms of the Communal Land Reform Act, occupying land without written permission is an offense which could lead to imprisonment. That's where Recon is at the moment. Recon should be charged, really, and issued with an eviction order to vacate that land, and they should remove all their infrastructure therefrom. Government is entrusted to protect indigenous people's land rights and to ensure that they have access to resources that they depend on for survival. And in this instance, government has truly failed to protect the Namibian people and protect our fragile ecosystem. No commercial ventures at all must threaten the indigenous people's ancestral land rights, which guarantee them a lifetime tenure security. We don't understand why President Hage Geingob is so much in support of ReconAfrica with all its corrupt and unethical practices here in our country and undermining our human rights and violating our laws. So how can the president support such a company? We don't understand why the president doesn't want us to speak up against things, against ReconAfrica that's violating our laws and constitution. This country is a threat to our sovereignty. It seems like it's only left to the NGOs now to protect this country and protect the Namibian people, because we love this country. This is our country. We don't have any other country. Where is the government's internal and external intelligence services to assist the state to make informed choices when giving licenses to foreign investors? It's only left up to us to protect this country and protect our environment and our ecosystem and our people, the country that we love, the land of the brave. It is our constitutional right to talk too much about practices that threaten our existence and undermine our sovereignty and do not advance the interests of the majority of the Namibians, as we heard from Matt. Namibians have nothing to gain from this, and this shouldn't be allowed to continue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Renani. We go again for questions, please.
Sorry, if you don't mind, I'll start off again. One of their questions was why does the government allow these sort of developments? And obviously what we found out so far is that government basically has a 10% share in this joint venture through the Ministry of Mines and Energies. So that would explain why suddenly the Ministry of Agriculture and Water Affairs allows these sort of developments. And in a longer way, it does explain to me why the Ministry of Environment, Forestry and Tourism would allow various certificates to be issued. It makes me understand, but I don't truly understand it. But the fact is, what I can see from your presentation now is that even the Ministry of Labour is conflicted in this whole matter. So the question surely must have come up already in your organization as to what the next step is. What are the steps left to the public to confront a government that's clearly conflicted?
Can you repeat your question, please?
So my question is, with all these conflicts going on, with the government clearly being conflicted, are you aware of any alternatives? What's the next step that the public can take to protect the right of the public? I mean, something must be done. Is it the Ombudsman? Is it an international agency? What are the next steps that can be introduced to basically hold our government to account?
We have had a session, an information session with the Namibian Parliament, and we continue to do so. And we believe that the Namibian people should really join and go behind the civil society organizations that are trying to fight against the oil and gas exploration in the Kavango regions. There are numerous organizations in Namibia. And some of us are here present today, and the only way we can really stop this from going on is if the Namibian public rallies behind us. We are on Facebook, we are on all social media platforms that people can get our information from and join us to increase the voices that are against the exploration in the Kavango region. We have been circulating petitions that people can sign. There's a social media link that link we're going to distribute it, and people can sign that so that we can have more voices and more people supporting us. That's the only way we can have this thing to be successful.
One small addition still is that there are objections pending at the communal land board in the Kavango East region against the allocation of land. So we'll also have a parallel legal process to explore exposing them. That has helped, for example, with the question of marine phosphate mining some years back, when one of our trustees objected to it, and it led in the end to the environmental minister putting aside the environmental clearance certificate. So we try a multi-pronged strategy to limit the damage that the speakers have outlined here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Kevin. I am a journalist and presenter with Eagle FM. I do have a question for you and one for Mr. York. When the president said that Namibians talk too much, did you interpret that as an attack on Namibia's civic society? And is that a veiled threat to say you need to shut up? And Mr. York, maybe if you can ventilate on the role that political party players have also played in this whole issue? Because we see civic society, we see experts, we see international organizations, but rarely also do we hear political parties within the National Assembly. Of course, we know the position that the president has taken, so seemingly seems to be the position of the ruling Swabo party and its ministers. But when it comes to other players in the National Assembly, what's your interpretation of their silence in this matter? Thank you.
Yes, President Geingob has been very hostile towards civil society organizations, and obviously we take that as a threat, or we take it as he's trying to say we talk too much, civil society talks too much, you should keep quiet and let Recon Africa continue with its operations. Because civil society organizations have been driving the movement against the oil and gas exploration in the Kavango regions. So obviously that's a direct threat towards civil society organizations. And it's the Constitution allows us to speak up against things that we feel are not correct, things that violate the Constitution. We are allowed to speak up against such things. And when the president says people talk too much, meaning that people should keep quiet, he is actually saying, is he trying to tell us the Constitution doesn't matter or what?
Related to that is the question of what we understand by democracy. It seems some of our leaders believe voting once every 5 years, that is democracy. And then we have to shut up for 5 years and wait for the next chance to vote for them or somebody else. Now, what we see happening now, and we've seen it over the years with the Shut It All Down movement and others, that Namibians move towards a democracy that makes sense in terms of being participatory. That people have say over issues that affect their life and this country, which is the only one we have. So in that sense, it's not a question of talking too much. It's a question of bringing democracy to life. And in this particular campaign, when you remember the last 4 points that Matt had on the presentation, what is demanded? It's answers, it's transparency, it's consultation, it's a public commission of inquiry, that all of us would know what is happening there. Break the silence, break the conspiracy. And also interesting, when you looked at the photos and the individuals in these photos, two are very prominent in both, and particularly a well-known local middleman that appears in all those deals. I don't have to mention the name, he is so well known from all over the show. That one must get suspicious. And that brings us now to the question of political parties. You're quite right. We had for too long a very hierarchical structure in political parties. The president speaks, everyone else claps. That was the political culture, not only in the ruling party, also in most of the opposition parties. What we see happening now is that especially younger members of parliament understand their role far more critical in terms of getting mandates on issues, reaching out to people. And in terms of this particular issue, I hope it will go differently to past ones. We took, years ago, as the Basic Income Grant Coalition, we took members of parliament to Ochivero to say, spend a day there, get your own impression. They were all convinced of it. When the former president then in parliament said, I think the BIG makes people lazy, they all shut up. Despite their own conviction, they feared, don't go against the political hierarchy. Tables are beginning to turn. And political parties now, especially newer movements, younger movements, have the opportunity to go or have structures in Kavango, speak to people there, and truly get a mandate, not once every 5 years, but get a mandate now. And our last speaker is already working with indigenous groups in Namibia that are also affected by that. So hopefully in Parliament we will see now a change to the point where members of Parliament will speak to their conviction, where members of Parliament that represent those communities and areas will get a real mandate and have the courage to confront even leadership in their own. And given the shifting numbers in Parliament, it is not so easy for one party alone to take these decisions anymore. We see also how very vocal other positions can have an influence and can encourage. So I think Recon Africa finds itself also at a political watershed in Namibia, where things can't just be centralized and bullied through. And in that sense, of course, media coverage is very important to keep this debate alive, to have prior informed consent, to give meaning to that. And hopefully this event today will be part of that process of change. But the consequences will be too ghastly. And I remember when I saw the pond here, the photo of the pond, a similar pond existed at Ramatex just outside the factory. We brought it that time to attention of government, said one rainy season in Windhoek, where the rains run into that pond, it will overflow. There was no protection from it. We were laughed off the table and said, we are threatening investors away. We should shut up. 2 months later, the rain came, and that poisonous wastewater ended up in the Goreangab Dam. Stand at the Goreangab Dam, look up the hill, you still see the Ramatex building factories there. The point is not to score points, but to say, when will we learn from that? We must not make the same mistakes over and over again. And thank you very much to our speakers. There's still some more for Rinani, and then Nadine.
I still have a question here from one of the internet followers. It says, when they occupied the Kawe land and so grabbed a large chunk of Andreas Fields, this is now obviously Andreas Mawanu, they told Andreas that the Kavango governor had approved and allocated that land to them. Does the governor have such rights under the Communal Land Act?
Not at all. Not at all. The traditional authority has the right to allocate land to people, but then their decision should be ratified by the communal land board. If it's not ratified by the communal land board, it means that that's illegal. So that's why we are saying that Recon Africa is occupying that land illegally, because if we're not getting clear answers here. We are not 100% sure if Recon Africa got that land from the traditional authority. They claim they have, but if the traditional authority gave them the right to use the land, that decision should have been ratified by the communal land board.
Maybe just a follow-up on that one, because Max Muyembu-Rupuku, who's the chairman of the regional communal boards for East and West Kavango up there, actually informed us at one stage that in fact his association should also first approve any land approval before the government or the communal land rights can be awarded. Would you know anything about that?
As I mentioned before, Namibia decided to include environmental protection in its constitution, and that they, through that process, they gave the conservancies and community forests the right to be part of the management of the wildlife and the environment. So yes, definitely when it comes to allocating land, such organizations as Max's should be consulted as well, but I'm sure they never were consulted. Do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, Hans Christian, Legal Assistance Center, Land, Environment and Development Department. To answer your question, Max's organization is a community forest, as I understand, and there are obviously conservancies also in that area. These conservancies, as much as the community forests, have to be approved with management plans, usage plans by the ministry. So that usage plan indicates, with everybody involved and everybody agrees, to this area is being used for farming, this area is being used for wildlife corridor, this is for whatever, residential area and so on. So any decision affecting the usage of that land contrary to what was agreed by all stakeholders, which is the conservancies, the community forest, the ministry, the communal land board, etc. If that happens, you cannot have any activity taking place going against the very same management plan which was submitted and approved by all stakeholders. That's basically the bottom line.
Thank you so much for that.
Okay, one very last, because we are unfortunately limited with time. We have to be out here by 12. So after this contribution.
Yeah, Frauke Röschlau, I work for DPA. I wanted to ask in this respect, does it boil down to some of the mining rights that where the basic is what is above the ground? Once you have found something under the ground, that belongs to government. Your forest on top might belong to you as a community. What's below that is government, and then they can tell you to go. I mean, the whole country's been mapped out pretty much. We've got the northwest where the people aren't allowed to go and do their grazing anymore. We've got the Namib where you can't drive through because everything's been cordoned off because you're not allowed there anymore. So this is, I think, a much bigger problem we're looking at if you're going into saying that what's under the ground belongs to government and everything that happens on top, including people's lives, doesn't matter once there's something underneath. Because exploration licenses have been issued to all and sundry. The tenderpreneurs are going out trying to find people all over the world to do these kind of things, whatever, be it mining, be it exploration, be it boosting their stock exchange figures. What is being done about changing something about this kind of notion within the Constitution? Because I know in the Northwest, people are just being told, sorry, this is our prospecting area, you can't take your cattle in here.
Yes, absolutely. That's a strange that's a strange law that whatever is under the ground belongs to the state. But what should actually happen is, in the case of ReconAfrica, the farmers around there should have been notified in good enough time and should have been relocated and should have been compensated for losing their land. I think that's the most important aspect that I can mention in regards to that. People should be compensated for whatever is found under the ground that they live on. But it hasn't happened anyway, yeah.
Compensation is not for what is under the ground, and so to say, participate in that. Compensation is for losing that land where the material or resources under that land. Fair compensation is required by law for the land usage, the land rights. You're not losing anything on the resources because you never had the rights to them. They always belong to the state.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you very much. Thank you, Renani. Thanks for the contributions also. We're now moving to Nadia April. She's a feminist activist involved in human rights advocacy work. She works currently with San young women and girls in various communities in Namibia, and she's the program officer for the Women's Leadership Center. Thank you very much, and also sorry for taking so long to give you the chance.
No problem. Good morning, everyone, members of the media, civil society organizations that are joining us, as well concerned citizens of the world that are joining us through the live stream. As mentioned, my name is Nadia April, and I'm from the Women's Leadership Center, a feminist women's rights organization that works with marginalized groups of women. And this also involves San indigenous women from the Kavango East region. As the women's rights organization, our concerns about the oil and gas exploration and invest production by ReconAfrica in the Kavango region focus on the social and health impact this will have, in particularly women and girls. We hope that by promoting the voices of San women leaders and sharing their thoughts, their experiences, we are able to engage the larger Namibian society in a critical dialogue about the violence done onto the land and the social and health impacts on the lives and livelihoods of the people that live in the Kavango region. We are particularly concerned about the lack of genuine consultation with indigenous San communities, including women who will be affected by toxic damage to their lands, waters, plants, animals, and the people themselves through the exploration and extraction of gas and oil in the region. The UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, which Namibia supported in the UN Assembly in 2007, guarantees indigenous communities the right to free, prior, informed consent regarding any matters relating to their resources, livelihoods, and cultural heritage. The San community leaders in the Kavango East region with whom WLC works with have not been consulted about the oil and gas exploration and strongly object to it. The following are the voices of San women on this issue. When Recon Africa came to ask for permission, they never talked about the negative impact the project will have on our environment and on us. They only promised employment to us. Most of us San people do not have formal education, and projects like this require highly skilled workers, which means we will not benefit from it. We San people from Muchiku depend on the Kavango River as a source of food and drinking water, and if it gets polluted, how are we going to survive? This will bring a lot of foreign men into our communities who will target San women and girls for sex. In particularly, our girls will be affected. We already have a high teenage pregnancy and school dropout rates in our communities, and this will increase the HIV and AIDS rates as well. San women and girls hereby hold the Namibian government accountable to the right of self-determination by their communities, including the guarantee of free, prior, and informed consent relating to the matters of concern to them. The following are some of the health impacts that I will touch on. We cannot allow history to repeat itself, and we shall learn from the testimonies and the lived realities and experiences of indigenous people in Canada and in the United States, who have been fighting against big oil companies on their lands and waters for years. We must be willing to learn from what has happened in the Niger Delta in Nigeria, where the Dutch oil company Shell has been ordered by court to spend millions of dollars on a cleanup project. We must observe and learn from the ongoing oil war in Mozambique as well. The health effects of toxic contaminants used in the oil and gas industry on women's reproductive health rights are often unseen due to prolonged unknown years of exposure. And research by the Southern Pennsylvania Environmental Health Project in the US found that air pollutants associated with oil and gas operations are known to cause serious health impacts in pregnant women, babies, and children, as well as other adults. The impacts on pregnant women and their babies include high-risk pregnancies, infertility, miscarriages, preterm births, low birth weights, and congenital heart defects. The health impact on children include rashes, upper respiratory symptoms, dizziness, vomiting, headaches, nosebleed, leukemia, asthma attacks, lung infections, and cancer. And the incidence of breast cancer increases with women as well, among women. Oil and gas operations will bring forth an influx of people from other areas of Namibia and neighboring countries seeking work, which will stretch the already poor services available to local residents of the Kavango region. with regards to land, housing, water, electricity, schools, clinics, hospitals, and other infrastructure. Development in other countries also show that very few jobs are created for local people. So this influx leads to increased poverty, crime, alcohol and drug abuse, as well as violence against women and girls, teenage pregnancy, and sexually transmitted disease. This will also be worsened by the setting up of so-called men camps. And these are housing of foreign well workers, which are mostly men that have no connection to the land as well as to the people of that community at that drilling site, but have the money to spend on leisure activities that might exploit the local people, including women and girls. The Namibian society needs to realize and recognize now that this is a disaster in the making, with serious consequences for the well-being and safety of marginalized San communities and others in the region. As the great feminist poet Audre Lorde said, "Our silence will not protect us, and so we will not be silenced and intimidated by those in power whose words and action seems to serve the cover-up of a severe case of well rot." Together, approximately 120 partner organizations from civil society in Namibia and over 70 international organizations, the Women Leadership Center is therefore respectfully calling on the government of Namibia to establish an independent, impartial public commission of inquiry to examine the current, the future oil and gas operations and the environmental, health, social, and gender impacts in the Kavango regions, until all Namibians can see a credible evidence of the potential impact on their lives, their livelihoods, and their rights, and consider what are realistic and sustainable alternative strategies to develop Namibia's energy and the Kavango regions. The government should impose a moratorium on the current oil and gas exploration activities. I thank you.
Thank you very much for these very powerful words of the people who are directly affected there, for bringing that to us here in Windhoek. They can't be physically here, but thank you very much, Nadia. There might be questions, although your points were so strong and clear, but let's hear if there are questions from the audience. Colleagues from the media. Was crystal clear.
Yes.
Thank you so much for that. And I think it's a wonderful way of ending off this tour that we had today, from the geologist aspect to the economic drivers of the project, to political implications, to environmental and water context. And we're ending off with the most vulnerable who are most likely to be directly affected by it. And the scenario that Nadia pointed to right now would not be surprising given international experiences. And I'm glad you also mentioned the Niger Delta, Ken Saro-Wiwa and many in that community who died because their very livelihood, access to clean water, access to the sea in the Niger Delta, was destroyed by Shell. And then Shell called on the Nigerian military regime and army to quell the dissent, which led to the killing. But the deaths are ongoing ever since. The damage done that time could never be repaired. And it's therefore a chance for us, and thank you to all our speakers today, all three, to point out we can still avoid that. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to our colleagues from the media, and I'll hand over to the organizers, to Liz Frank from the Women Leadership Center to have the final word.
Thank you very much, Herbert, for your moderation.
It's been a long time since we had Nengof, we had Nanaso, we had other big NGO platforms where we came together, we voiced our concerns, we protested, we marched. We need to start that again. And as Women's Leadership Centre, we kept wondering, why is there so much activism globally? There's a frack-free Namibia Botswana group, WhatsApp group. They are busy, they're researching, they're sharing, they're asking, where are the Namibians? We cannot speak for the Namibians. Why are they so quiet? We looked around, our environmental organizations were quiet, our lawyers, our political part, everyone was just quiet. And then one day we read in the newspaper, in the Namibian, a story by Rob Parker, a Canadian environmental activist who was living in Namibia. The story was called "Canada, Come Get Your People." And that headline caught our attention at Women's Leadership Centre. We read that and we said, okay, we are working with San communities in Bwabwata National Park, in Kavango East region. We are here. Let's start creating a platform for the voices of San women to join in this discussion. But then we said also, as a women's rights organization, it's not just about San issues, it's about women's issues, it's about gender issues, it's about children's issues, it's about environmental issues. All those issues are feminist issues. So we're coming at it from a feminist perspective, and we are saying all people's rights must be respected, all people's health, all people's livelihoods. And we're not quite done yet, because Rob Parker, whom I just mentioned, he's back in Canada. And when we realized we're having this media conference a week ago, and our president had just said in public that he trusts ReconAfrica because they're from Canada. And Canada does no harm to the environment. So Rob Parker in Canada last night put together a slideshow for us. It's about 4 minutes, which will give us an idea of how Canada worldwide destroys the environment, violates human rights, uses violence to get their project through. This is a direct message to our president about why we cannot trust a Canadian mining organization. Thank you.
These companies don't act that much better sometimes. This is what they do in Canada. Imperial Metals was a 4 square kilometer sized tailings pond full of copper and gold mining waste breached, putting an estimated 26 billion liters of contaminated material into Polly Lake, Hazeltine Creek, and Quencel Lake. TMX Trans Mountain Expansion is a Canadian government-owned tar sands pipeline currently being twinned without the prior informed consent of all First Nations. Indigenous women in the area resisting the pipeline are currently being harassed and surveilled by Canadian security forces. One last company bears mentioning here. Bre-X is a Canadian company that claimed to have found the world's largest gold deposit in Indonesia. But they didn't, because Canada is also home to penny stock scams, money laundering, and insider trading. My name is Rob Parker, and this is a report on Canadian extractive firms. On August 11th visit to the State House in Namibia with Recon Africa founder Craig Stanke, the Namibian president stated, "Of course, coming from Canada, I was not worried that you would do something wrong to the environment. People who have experienced the Canadian extractive industry in places like Guatemala, Honduras, and Eritrea would find this statement surprising. The reality is that Canadian extractive companies are notorious for human rights and environmental abuses around the world. In fact, a 2010 report originally commissioned from within the Canadian mining industry itself and leaked concluded that the Canadian mining industry were the worst offenders in the world when it came to environmental and human rights abuses. Since then, not much has changed. Canada has relaxed regulations to allow oil and gas and mining companies to headquarter in Canada. Up to 75% of the world's mining companies are based in Canada. Canada has no real enforcement mechanisms to hold those companies accountable operating abroad for human rights or environmental destruction. Canada has expectation for their companies operating abroad, but they are not legally required to meet any standards. Canada has no real framework to hold these companies accountable, and people harmed by those companies cannot access justice inside Canada. The Canadian government created the Canadian Ombudsman for Responsible Enterprise, the core ombudsman, with the intention of addressing the rampant human rights abuses. However, that office's powers were taken from it in the dark of the night after intense lobbying by the Canadian mining industry, who did not want to be hampered by human rights legislation or pesky regulations. This sends a clear message to companies that if you are based in Canada, you won't ever have to face consequences for your actions in places like Latin America or Africa. Here's just a few examples of Canadian companies abroad. Bale's a Canadian company responsible for the 2019 Brumadinho Dam disaster, when their huge tailing dam in Brazil collapsed, killing 259 people, with 11 more who were never found. Enbridge is a pipeline company responsible for the largest inland oil spill in U.S. history, where 1.7 million gallons of crude oil was spilled in 1991. They're currently building their Line 3 tar sands pipeline through Minnesota, where there has been police brutality against unarmed people resisting this pipeline and over 600 arrests, all funded by the company. Equinox Gold is a Canadian company responsible for contaminating over 4,000 people's drinking water in Brazil after their mine tailings dam collapsed. Barrick Gold is based in Tanzania, famous for human rights abuses and violence against local communities. Since 2014, Mining Watch Canada has documented over 200 cases of excessive force by the Canadian company. Tahoe Resources is a Canadian mining company whose security personnel opened fire on unarmed protesters in Guatemala. Nevsun is a Canadian mining company sued by former workers for using forced labor, slavery, and torture at their Bisha mine in Eritrea. In Canada, these companies don't act that much better sometimes. This is what they do in Canada. Imperial Metals was a 4 square kilometer sized tailings pond full of copper and gold mining waste breached, putting an estimated 26 billion liters of contaminated material into Polly Lake, Hazeltine Creek, and Quencel Lake. TMX Trans Mountain Expansion is a Canadian government-owned tar sands pipeline currently being twinned without the prior informed consent of all First Nations. Indigenous women in the area resisting the pipeline are currently being harassed and surveilled by Canadian security forces. One last company bears mentioning here. Bre-X is a Canadian company that claimed to have found the world's largest gold deposit in Indonesia. But they didn't, because Canada is also home to penny stock scams, money laundering, and insider trading.
Yes. Liz, do you want to add anything else? Or?
So thank you very much again for everyone, for the presenters. You spent so much time gathering the information, putting it into presentations that make it easier for us to understand. This is only the beginning. This is only the beginning. The question asked earlier, what's next? We keep doing what we're doing. We keep speaking. We talk more. We mobilize more people. We find ways to get information like this to the people in the Kavango, in their languages, to the San people in Bwabwata, the Kwe, in Kwedam. So we are just starting. We need more support. Women's Leadership Centre is looking for a campaign manager who can help with all the work that we are planning. We also realize we need to reach the hearts and minds of people. And we know that theatre, that film, that music, poetry, at WLC we use a lot of creative forms of expression to bring our message across. So we have many, many ideas of how to reach the hearts and minds of the Namibian people to a point of no return, where our political parties, those in power, just need to start listening to what we are saying. So thanks everyone, and we will meet again.